The mountain exploded. Water roared down like nature's fury unleashed. 17-year-old Connor Blake watched the luxury BMW tumble through the flash flood. Metal screamed, glass shattered. A woman's desperate cry pierced through the chaos. Connor didn't hesitate. He plunged into the deadly torrent, ice-cold water slicing through his skin like knives. The woman he dragged to safety was trembling, soaked, and wore a Cartier watch worth more than his entire life. Her Chanel suit hung in tatters, but her eyes held a grief so profound it made his breath catch. She studied his face like she was memorizing every detail, then whispered through chattering teeth, "Thank you." What Connor didn't know was that this mysterious woman was running from a devastating loss that would soon bind their hearts together in ways neither could imagine. Connor Blake had been collecting firewood on the mountainside when the storm hit Blue Ridge Valley with unprecedented fury. At 17, he'd learned to read the mountain's moods better than most locals twice his age, understanding the subtle signs that preceded dangerous weather patterns. The orphaned boy had been living alone in his grandmother's weathered cabin for 2 years now, ever since pancreatic cancer had taken the last family member he had left in this world. Mrs. Henderson from down the valley often clucked her tongue and said Connor was far too young to be fending for himself in such isolation. But the boy had developed a quiet strength and self-reliance that came from surviving one devastating loss after another. His parents had died in a car accident when he was just 12 years old, leaving him with only his grandmother's gentle hands, her endless patience, and her stories of surviving hardship through determination and grace. The cabin sat nestled between towering pine trees that had weathered decades of mountain storms, its wooden walls aged but sturdy, built by Connor's grandfather with the kind of craftsmanship that lasted generations. He'd taught himself to fix the sagging roof using YouTube videos and trial and error, tend a small but productive vegetable garden that sustained him through lean months, and create handcrafted wooden furniture that he sold to the occasional tourists who wandered through their forgotten corner of western North Carolina. The boy's calloused hands could coax unexpected beauty from rough timber, creating intricate carvings and functional pieces that spoke of patience, natural artistic talent, and a wisdom far beyond his 17 years. But tonight, as he helped the mysterious injured woman into his warm, lamp-lit cabin, Connor felt something he hadn't experienced since his grandmother's peaceful death 2 winters ago. The strange, almost forgotten sensation of wanting to protect someone else, of having another person to care for and worry about. Catherine sat shivering by the crackling fireplace, steam rising from her designer clothes as they slowly dried in the cabin's cozy warmth. She kept glancing around the humble but well-maintained space with an expression Connor couldn't quite decipher. Not the disgust or condescending pity he might have expected from someone clearly accustomed to luxury, but something closer to genuine wonder and appreciation. Her expensive smartphone had been completely destroyed in the flood, she explained, with what sounded like relief rather than distress, and she seemed oddly grateful to be cut off from whatever world she'd left behind. When Connor offered her his grandmother's soft flannel nightgown and a steaming bowl of vegetable soup made from produce grown in his own garden, Catherine's carefully composed mask slipped, and her eyes filled with tears that she tried unsuccessfully to hide. "When was the last time someone cooked for you, sweetheart?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a maternal concern that made Connor's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. She watched him ladle the simple but nourishing meal with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to taking care of himself, her heart breaking at the sight of this young man who'd clearly been forced to grow up far too quickly. The question caught Connor completely off guard, his wooden spoon freezing halfway to his mouth as he realized he couldn't remember the last time anyone had called him an endearing name or expressed genuine concern for his well-being. "I take care of myself just fine, Mom," he said quietly, but his voice cracked slightly on the words, betraying the loneliness he worked so hard to hide from the world. Catherine reached across the small, hand-hewn dining table and gently touched his work-roughened hand with her own soft fingers. Her skin was unmarked by the kind of physical labor that had calloused Connor's palms and strengthened his young shoulders, yet her touch felt more genuinely maternal than anything he'd experienced in the 2 years since his grandmother's death. Something profound shifted in Catherine's expression as she looked at this brave, self-sufficient boy who'd risked his life to save a complete stranger, a protective instinct awakening deep in her chest that seemed to surprise even her with its intensity. "You shouldn't have to take care of yourself alone," she whispered, her thumb tracing gently over his knuckles. No child should have to carry that burden by himself. Over the next 3 days, as the unprecedented storm raged outside their warm sanctuary, Catherine recovered from her injuries while Connor tended to her with the same gentle, attentive care his grandmother had once shown him during his own childhood illnesses. She never spoke about what had brought her to this remote mountain road or why she'd been driving alone through such obviously dangerous weather conditions. Instead, she listened with genuine fascination and respect as Connor proudly showed her his woodworking projects, intricate carvings, sturdy furniture, decorative pieces that revealed remarkable artistic ability. She marveled at his ingenious solar panel setup that provided the cabin with reliable electricity and his sophisticated rainwater collection system that ensured fresh water even during dry spells. Her questions about his work were thoughtful, detailed, almost professional in their insight, revealing a sharp, analytical mind operating beneath her grief-stricken exterior. "You designed and built all of this yourself? At just 17 years old?" she asked, running her manicured fingers along the smooth surface of a hand-carved chair with obvious appreciation and growing amazement. Connor blushed at her praise, unaccustomed to having his accomplishments recognized or valued by anyone. "My grandma always said idle hands make trouble and busy hands make beauty," he replied, unconsciously echoing the woman who'd raised him with love and practical wisdom. Catherine smiled at this simple philosophy, filing it away in her memory alongside all the other lessons this remarkable young man was teaching her about resilience, creativity, and finding purpose in life's simplest pleasures. Catherine found herself drawn to watch Connor work with increasing fascination, marveling at the way his young but skilled hands shaped raw pieces of mountain timber into objects of surprising beauty and sophisticated function. She helped him with basic household tasks around the cabin, and he patiently, without condescension, taught her essential skills she'd never had reason to learn in her previous life. How to start a fire without matches using only natural materials, how to identify edible plants that grew wild on the mountainside, how to fix a broken water pipe using nothing but scraps and creative ingenuity. There was something deeply healing about the elegant simplicity of it all, the way Connor approached each task with quiet competence, practical problem-solving skills, and absolutely no complaints about his challenging circumstances or the limitations of his resources. When she accidentally used sophisticated business terminology while discussing potential marketing strategies for his furniture sales, she quickly covered her slip with nervous laughter and deflecting comments about having watched too many entrepreneurship shows on television. But Connor was too naturally polite and respectful to push for explanations about inconsistencies in her story, even when her expensive manicure and soft hands clearly contradicted any claim to ordinary middle-class background. He sensed she was running from something painful and needed space to heal, so he simply accepted her presence and offered the kind of unconditional hospitality his grandmother had taught him was the mark of true character. On their final night together before the mountain roads cleared enough for safe travel, they sat side by the warm, dancing fire, sharing stories and dreams in the intimate way that only happens between people who've shared adversity and found unexpected connection. Connor spoke softly but passionately about his long-term dreams of eventually opening a much larger workshop someday, a place where he could teach other young people the traditional skills his grandmother had lovingly passed down to him through patient instruction and gentle encouragement. His eyes lit up with genuine excitement as he described his vision of creating a thriving community where people could learn to be genuinely self-sufficient and find deep purpose and satisfaction in creating beautiful, useful things with their own hands, rather than simply consuming mass-produced items. Catherine listened with tears streaming down her cheeks, her hand unconsciously reaching toward him in a gesture that felt as natural and protective as breathing itself. Something about his dreams, his generous spirit, his resilience in the face of loss, reminded her so powerfully of someone precious she'd lost that it made her heart ache with bittersweet recognition. "You remind me of someone very special," she whispered, her voice thick with barely controlled emotion and memories that still felt too raw to fully share. "Someone who would have absolutely loved meeting you, learning from you, maybe even working alongside you in that workshop you're going to build someday." Connor saw the pain flash across her features and instinctively reached for her hand, offering wordless comfort to this mysterious woman who'd somehow become so important to him in just a few short days. But their peaceful, healing bubble was violently shattered the next morning, when the aggressive sound of multiple helicopters filled the previously tranquil valley with mechanical noise and chaos. Connor watched in growing confusion and alarm as a convoy of expensive black SUVs wound their way up the narrow, treacherous mountain road toward his isolated cabin, their tinted windows and official appearance suggesting government or corporate authority he'd never encountered in his simple life. Men and women in obviously expensive business suits emerged from the vehicles, speaking urgently into wireless earpieces and looking entirely out of place and uncomfortable in the wilderness setting, their polished shoes and formal attire completely inappropriate for the rugged mountain terrain. The lead investigator, a stern-faced man in his 50s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Connor's annual income, approached the bewildered teenager with barely concealed impatience and obvious disdain for having to venture into such rustic surroundings. "Son," he said in a clipped, condescending tone that immediately put Connor on edge. "We're looking for Catherine Harrison, Chief Executive Officer of Harrison Energy Corporation. She's been missing for over a week now, and her disappearance has created a significant crisis for one of America's largest energy companies. Have you seen anyone matching her description?" The formal words hit Connor like a series of physical blows to his chest, each syllable driving home the growing realization that nothing about the past few days had been what it seemed. Connor turned slowly to look at Catherine, who had appeared in the cabin's doorway and gone completely pale at the sight of the corporate team, her body language transformed from the relaxed, maternal warmth he'd grown accustomed to into the rigid posture of a trapped animal facing inevitable capture. Her eyes met his across the small distance between them, and he saw guilt, terror, and desperate apology reflected in her gaze. "Catherine Harrison," Connor repeated numbly, the unfamiliar formal name feeling strange and cold on his tongue, after days of simply calling her Catherine. You're really her? The CEO they're talking about?" His voice carried the hurt and confusion of someone discovering that everything he'd believed about a person he'd come to care for was built on carefully constructed lies. The devastating revelation unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare that Connor felt powerless to stop or escape. Catherine wasn't just wealthy, as her expensive clothes and jewelry had suggested. She was one of the most powerful and influential people in the entire country, the head of a massive energy empire worth billions of dollars that affected the lives of thousands of employees and millions of customers. The corporate representative spoke about her disappearance in clinical, businesslike terms that reduced her to little more than a valuable asset that had temporarily gone missing, using cold phrases like mental instability following recent personal tragedy and emergency succession protocols that made Connor's skin crawl with their dehumanizing implications. Through their rapid-fire, jargon-filled explanations, Connor learned that Catherine had suffered an unimaginable personal loss 3 months earlier when her 16-year-old son Nathan had been killed in a racing accident, leaving her as the sole heir to a vast industrial legacy built over generations of her family's work and sacrifice. The corporate team spoke about Nathan in the same detached, business-focused terms they used for everything else, referring to him as the designated successor and a significant loss to future company leadership, rather than acknowledging that Catherine had lost her child, her heart, her reason for living. Connor felt sick listening to them discuss the most intimate tragedy of Catherine's life as if it were just another item on a corporate agenda that needed to be efficiently managed and resolved. When the company's high-powered legal team arrived by helicopter 30 minutes later, they treated Connor as if he were completely invisible, speaking over his head and around him as if he were just another piece of furniture in his own home, rather than a human being deserving of basic respect and acknowledgement. "Mom," the lead attorney announced in a voice as cold and sharp as winter wind, "the board of directors has initiated emergency proceedings during your unauthorized absence from corporate headquarters. Several members are formally questioning your mental fitness to continue serving as chief executive officer, and there's growing support for implementing immediate succession protocols. We need to return to New York immediately to prevent what could become a successful hostile takeover attempt." Catherine's transformation was swift, heartbreaking, and terrible to witness. The warm, vulnerable, genuinely maternal woman who had slowly emerged over their days together disappeared completely behind an impenetrable mask of corporate composure and emotional distance that felt like a slap across Connor's face. Her posture straightened, her expression hardened into professional neutrality, and her voice took on the clipped, authoritative tone of a business executive addressing subordinates rather than the gentle warmth she'd shown him. When Connor tried to speak to her, to ask her directly about what was happening and what it meant for them, she avoided his desperate gaze as if looking at him would cause her physical pain. "I need to leave immediately," Catherine said without looking at him, already allowing her assistants to help her change back into the designer clothes they'd brought from her luxury hotel suite in Asheville. "This whole situation was a serious mistake on my part. I wasn't thinking clearly after the accident, and I made some very poor decisions that I deeply regret." Her words felt like individual slaps across Connor's face, each one designed to inflict maximum emotional damage and create distance between them. "You mean nothing we shared over these days was real?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his heart breaking with each word he forced himself to speak. Catherine finally met his eyes for one brief, devastating moment, and Connor saw the woman he'd come to care for so deeply hiding behind the cold corporate mask. But then the professional facade slipped back into place like armor designed to protect her from feeling anything genuine or vulnerable. "You're a good kid, Connor," she said with the kind of patronizing dismissal that adults use when they want to end uncomfortable conversations with children. "But you don't understand the complexities and responsibilities of my world, the pressures and obligations that come with the position I hold. What we had here in this cabin was just grief talking, trauma responses, nothing more substantial than that. I need professional psychiatric help, not mountain air and fairy tale fantasies about simple living." Connor watched helplessly, his heart shattering into increasingly smaller pieces as the efficient corporate team systematically erased all traces of Catherine's presence from his cabin and his life. They were thorough, professional, and utterly ruthless in their efficiency, treating his humble but beloved home like a contaminated crime scene that needed to be completely sanitized and sterilized. They bagged her borrowed clothes, wiped down surfaces she'd touched, and even swept up crumbs from the bread she'd shared with him, as if her presence had been some kind of infection that needed to be completely eliminated. The helicopter blades whipped the surrounding trees into a frenzy, as Catherine was essentially escorted away under corporate guard from the brief life she'd shared with him, carried toward a world of board meetings and stock prices and decisions that affected thousands of people she'd never meet. She didn't look back even once as the aircraft lifted off, carrying her toward her corporate responsibilities and away from the mountain sanctuary where they'd found something precious and rare together. Connor stood alone in the sudden, overwhelming silence that followed the helicopter's departure, holding the small wooden carving he'd made for her during their time together. An intricate mountain scene, complete with tiny pine trees and a flowing stream that now felt like a cruel reminder of how foolish and naive he'd been to believe in their connection. The piece felt heavy in his hands, weighted with all the hopes and dreams and maternal love he'd thought they'd shared, now revealed to be nothing more than his own desperate imagination and wishful thinking. 2 long, empty months passed like a thick fog of loneliness, self-doubt, and gradually growing bitterness that settled over Connor's life like a suffocating blanket. He threw himself into his woodworking with almost manic intensity, trying desperately to forget the brief taste of maternal warmth and genuine family connection he'd experienced, and the crushing, humiliating rejection that had followed so swiftly afterward. He told himself repeatedly that he'd been incredibly naive and foolish to think someone of Catherine's wealth, power, and sophistication could ever really care about someone like him. A poor, orphaned mountain boy with calloused hands and simple dreams that probably seemed laughably small to someone who commanded corporate empires. The local and regional newspapers had picked up the story with the kind of sensationalistic enthusiasm that small-town papers reserve for scandals involving famous people, painting Connor alternately as a calculating gold digger who'd tried to take advantage of a grieving billionaire's emotional vulnerability, or as a naive mountain boy who'd been cruelly manipulated and used by a wealthy woman having some kind of mental breakdown. Neither portrayal felt accurate or fair to Connor, but the unwelcome attention was intrusive and painful, forcing him to avoid town completely and rely even more heavily on his solitary existence and the few online customers who bought his furniture without knowing his personal story. Some particularly difficult days, when the loneliness felt like it might swallow him whole, Connor seriously considered leaving Blue Ridge Valley entirely and starting over somewhere completely new, where no one knew his story or could remind him of his brief, foolish hope for family. But fate, it seemed, had other plans that would test everything Connor thought he knew about love, loss, and second chances. On a cold, rainy Tuesday morning in mid-November, Connor lost control of his grandfather's old pickup truck on the winding, treacherous mountain road while driving carefully to deliver a custom dining set to a customer in Asheville. The vehicle hit a patch of black ice hidden beneath fallen autumn leaves, spun twice, and then rolled down a steep embankment before coming to rest upside down against a grove of pine trees, leaving Connor trapped inside with serious internal injuries, a compound fracture in his left leg, and a concussion that left him drifting in and out of consciousness. A passing park ranger found him nearly 4 hours later, hypothermic and barely breathing, and immediately called for emergency helicopter transport to the Regional Trauma Center in Asheville. Connor drifted in and out of consciousness during the flight, his mind foggy with pain medication and shock, but somehow through the medical chaos he kept hearing someone calling his name from what seemed like a great distance, a voice that sounded familiar and urgent and filled with a kind of desperate love he'd thought he'd imagined. The voice followed him through surgery and into the intensive care unit, where machines kept track of his vital signs, and a steady stream of medical professionals monitored his slow, uncertain recovery. He finally woke fully 3 days later to find Catherine sitting beside his hospital bed, looking haggard and at least 10 years older than her 45 years, as if she'd aged dramatically in the months since he'd seen her. She wasn't wearing the polished armor of a corporate CEO now, just simple blue jeans and a soft grey sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face free of makeup, and her eyes red and swollen from what looked like days of crying. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap as if she were holding herself together by force of will alone, and when she saw his eyes open and focus on her face, she let out a sob of relief that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. "I came as soon as I heard about the accident," she said softly, reaching for his hand with fingers that trembled like autumn leaves in the wind. "I've been such a fool, Connor. Such a terrible, selfish, cowardly fool." Her voice broke completely as she continued, tears streaming down her cheeks without any attempt to hide or control them. "When I heard you were hurt, when the doctors said you might not make it, when I thought I might lose you too after I'd already thrown away the chance to be your mother, I realized I'd been running from the most important thing that had happened to me since Nathan died." The truth came pouring out of Catherine like water through a broken dam, years of carefully controlled corporate composure finally giving way to raw, honest emotion that she'd been suppressing for months. She told Connor about Nathan in detail for the first time, her brilliant, compassionate, idealistic 16-year-old son, who had died in a racing accident on a Saturday afternoon while she was attending yet another supposedly crucial board meeting that had seemed more important than spending time with her child. She spoke about the crushing, overwhelming guilt she carried every single day, how she'd systematically prioritized corporate responsibilities over soccer games and school plays and bedtime stories, how Nathan had died feeling unloved and neglected because she'd been too busy building what she'd convinced herself was his future legacy to actually be present in his daily life. "I came to the mountains to escape," she whispered, her voice raw with pain and regret that had been eating away at her for months. "I was driving too fast, not paying attention, probably hoping the mountain would solve my problems for me. But what I found instead was you, and through you, I discovered what I should have been all along. You gave me a second chance to be the kind of mother Nathan needed and deserved, the kind of mother I'd forgotten how to be." She paused, struggling to find words for emotions that felt too large and complex for language. "When I left you, when I hurt you the way I did, I was doing exactly what I'd done to Nathan, choosing corporate responsibility over love, choosing what other people expected of me over what my heart knew was right." Catherine had made a decision in the weeks following Connor's accident that had shocked the corporate world and sent ripples through the entire energy industry. She'd liquidated a significant portion of her personal assets to ensure Connor received the absolute best medical care available, flying in specialists from major medical centers and covering every expense without question or hesitation. More importantly, she'd resigned from her position as chairman of the board at Harrison Energy, choosing instead to restructure the company around the values Nathan had believed in, rather than the profit-first mentality that had consumed her life and destroyed her relationship with her son. "The board fought me every step of the way," she explained, her voice growing stronger as she talked about the corporate battle she'd waged on Connor's behalf. "They threatened lawsuits, tried to have me declared mentally incompetent, even attempted a hostile takeover while you were in intensive care. But Nathan's will had a clause I'd completely forgotten about. If I could prove I was acting in the spirit of compassion and social responsibility he'd valued so highly, I retained controlling interest in his shares and could restructure the company however I saw fit." She smiled through her tears, the first genuine smile Connor had seen from her since that night by the fireplace. "Your accident, as terrible as it was, became my wake-up call. I realized I'd rather lose every penny of the Harrison fortune than lose the chance to be your mother the way I should have been Nathan's. When Connor was finally released from the hospital 6 weeks later, still walking with a cane and facing months of physical therapy, Catherine was there to drive him home to a cabin that had been quietly but thoroughly transformed during his recovery. She'd arranged for professional physical therapy equipment to be installed in what had been his grandmother's sewing room, had stocked the kitchen with healthy, nourishing food recommended by his nutritionist, and had filled the space with small touches that spoke of genuine care and attention. Fresh flowers, books she thought he'd enjoy, and a new woodworking bench designed to accommodate his temporary mobility limitations. More importantly than any material changes, Catherine had brought something to the cabin that Connor had never dared hope for again, a profound sense of belonging, of being genuinely wanted and loved without conditions or expectations. They established daily routines together that felt as natural and comfortable as breathing itself. Quiet breakfast conversations over coffee and fresh fruit, collaborative cooking sessions where Catherine learned to prepare his grandmother's traditional recipes while he taught her the stories and memories attached to each dish, and peaceful evening hours spent working on separate projects while enjoying each other's company. Catherine learned to appreciate the deep satisfaction of mountain mornings when mist rose from the valleys like gentle ghosts, the meditation of watching Connor's skilled hands transform raw wood into objects of beauty and function, and the profound peace that came from living according to natural rhythms rather than corporate schedules. Connor, meanwhile, discovered what it felt like to have someone genuinely worry about his well-being, to celebrate his small daily accomplishments, and to offer the kind of unconditional emotional support he'd been missing since his grandmother's death. The legal adoption process took several months to complete, involving background checks, home visits, and court hearings that felt surreal to both of them, given their unconventional circumstances and the significant age difference that raised eyebrows among social workers accustomed to more traditional family arrangements. But the emotional transformation happened much faster than any legal procedure could formalize. Catherine discovered that being Connor's mother gave her life a purpose and joy she'd never experienced, even during her most successful and celebrated corporate years when she'd been featured on magazine covers and praised for her business acumen. She set up a sophisticated home office in the cabin's loft space, managing her restructured company remotely through video conferences and digital communication, while never missing Connor's physical therapy appointments, his college preparation meetings, or the quiet evening conversations that had become the foundation of their relationship. Harrison Energy began focusing heavily on renewable resources and community development projects under Catherine's new leadership approach, with her frequently citing her son's influence on her evolved understanding of what constituted genuine success and meaningful legacy. Connor flourished under Catherine's patient, attentive care in ways that surprised and delighted them both. With her emotional encouragement and financial support, he enrolled in North Carolina State University's engineering program, while continuing to develop and refine his woodworking skills during summers and breaks. His unique combination of traditional craftsmanship techniques and innovative design thinking quickly caught the attention of professors and fellow students alike, leading to research opportunities and internships that would have been impossible without Catherine's connections and resources. Catherine attended every parent weekend, graduation ceremony, and academic achievement celebration with obvious pride and joy, often telling people that Connor had taught her more about real success and meaningful accomplishment than any business school or corporate training program ever could. She kept photos of his woodworking projects in her office and never hesitated to redirect business conversations toward discussions of her son's latest innovations in sustainable design and community-focused engineering projects. A year after the adoption was legally finalized, Catherine and Connor established an ambitious workshop and community center near the original cabin, creating exactly the kind of space Connor had dreamed about during their first conversations by the fireplace months earlier. The facility combined traditional woodworking and crafts instruction with modern sustainable technology training, attracting young people from across the southeastern United States who wanted to learn skills that connected them to both heritage traditions and environmental innovation. Connor served as both lead instructor and living inspiration for the program participants, many of whom came from backgrounds of poverty, family disruption, or educational failure similar to his own early experiences. Catherine used her extensive business expertise and professional networks to secure funding and partnerships with universities and environmental organizations, but she was always careful to ensure that the heart of the operation remained Connor's original vision of empowering others through meaningful work and genuine community connection, rather than mere job training or economic development. The workshop quickly became a nationally recognized model for rural development that successfully balanced economic opportunity with environmental responsibility and cultural preservation. Visitors from other states and even other countries came to study their innovative approach, interviewing Catherine about her remarkable transition from traditional corporate leadership to what business journals and academic researchers called heart-centered entrepreneurship and values-based business modeling. But Catherine always deflected credit for the program's success back to Connor, patiently explaining to reporters and researchers that her son had taught her the crucial difference between building wealth and building a life worth living, between achieving success and creating significance. She spoke openly about her previous failures as a mother and as a human being, using her platform to encourage other parents and business leaders to examine their own priorities before tragedy forced them to confront what really mattered in life. On quiet Sunday evenings, Catherine and Connor still sat by the crackling fireplace in the original cabin, often working on separate projects but completely comfortable in each other's presence after years of building trust and understanding together. Catherine might be reviewing sustainable energy proposals for Harrison Energy's latest community development initiative, while Connor carved wooden toys for the children of workshop participants or designed furniture pieces that would be featured in the center's upcoming exhibition of student work. They rarely talked explicitly about the dramatic, painful circumstances that had brought them together, preferring to focus their energy and attention on the bright future they were building together, one careful decision at a time. Their relationship had evolved into something deeper and more resilient than either had imagined possible during those first uncertain days. Not just mother and son in the legal sense, but true partners in creating the kind of legacy Nathan would have been proud of, and that honored the memory of Connor's grandmother's values. The mountain stream that had brought them together during that violent flood now powered a sophisticated small hydroelectric system that Connor had designed and built for the workshop, providing clean energy for the facility's operations while serving as a teaching tool for students learning about renewable resource management. On the anniversary of their first meeting each year, they always visited the spot where the flash flood had changed both their lives forever, not to dwell on trauma or loss, but to appreciate and celebrate what they'd found in each other through surviving the worst of circumstances. Catherine would sometimes wonder aloud what would have happened if Connor hadn't been collecting firewood that particular afternoon, if his courage and compassion hadn't saved her in more ways than she could count, if she'd continued running from her grief until it consumed what was left of her capacity for love. But Connor always smiled and gently reminded her that some things were meant to be, that family isn't always about blood or biology, but about the conscious choice to love and protect each other no matter what challenges the world presents. As they watched the sun set over the Blue Ridge Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple that took their breath away every single time, both Catherine and Connor understood with deep certainty that they'd discovered something precious and increasingly rare in the modern world, a second chance at family, built not on obligation or expectation or legal documents, but on mutual respect, genuine affection, shared values, and the unwavering commitment to honor the memory of those they'd loved and lost by living lives of purpose, connection, and meaning that would make their loved ones proud.